Hi, I'm Bruce Eckel,
And I'm James Ward.
and this is First Steps in Flex. And we're now going to look at architectural patterns, which we need to think about because this is not like creating your normal HTML applications where all the logic is on the server. With a Flex app, everything can be much more complicated, and all the examples that we've been looking at so far have been fairly simple, and so we've been doing them in the simplest way possible. But as your applications get larger, you need to start thinking about how you're going to divide them up into pieces and then hook those pieces together.
Exactly. Yeah, and so there's a number of different approaches for how we can do that in Flex. A lot of these pull from the typical ways of architecting software. So MVC is one approach that's been used quite a bit in Flex.
And that means Model View Controller, which was developed, at least as far as I know, from Smalltalk.
Yeah, I think so.
And lots of people have used Model View Controller in various different ways. You'll see it implemented often you'll see it implemented with the model separated from the view and the controller, which are typically coupled more closely together.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we'll be looking at MVC and how to use that pattern in Flex. And then also the message bus approach, which is another approach used pretty frequently in software development. So we'll look at that one. A newer approach that more people are beginning to adopt in Flex is the inversion of control implemented through dependency injection method. And when we published the book, that wasn't a real popular method in Flex yet, so we didn't have an example for that. But now that that's more popular via frameworks like Swizz and Parsley, we'll be looking at adding that for the next edition.
Okay. Well, let's look at how Model View Controller works.
So we're first going to start out with just a simple application, very similar to a lot of the code that we've already seen in the book. And then what we're going to do is then break that application into its model view and controller pieces. So what we're first going to do is, in our application, we're going to have a script block here. And our script block will have some data defined here in the script block. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a bindable public var buddies, and that's of type array collection. And then we're going to initialize that to a new array collection and set its default value here to my buddies Sean, Sam, Seth, and Sally. And so those are my buddies that will be in this array collection. Let's format this a little bit. And remove that C data block, which we don't need. So that's going to be essentially our model, but right now it's just in our main application class. So then the next thing to add is a controller. And so our controller will also define here an action script, and what we're going to say is public function add buddy. And so what add buddy is going to do is take a name string parameter, return void, and it's just going to then add an item to buddies. So we'll say buddies.add item. And the item that we're going to add is just going to be the name that's passed in there. So that's our controller, and just does some simple logic to manipulate our underlying data.
And basically we're hiding the underlying implementation that it happens to be an array collection. We're just exposing the fact that in this thing you can add a buddy.
Yep. Yeah, we're focusing on the specific function around this domain rather than kind of the underlying plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
So then let's add a list to display. So this will be our view. So we're going to add the data provider, tell the data provider to bind to buddies. And then let's also have a way to add a buddy. So let's create a button, and label will be add buddy. And then a click event handler that's going to call that add buddy function. And then we'll just put a name in here, new buddy.
Whereas normally you'd probably have a text
input, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So let's save that and see how this looks. So when we run this, we get our list with those names, our buddies, and then when we click Add Buddy, we're adding a buddy to that. And we can go widen that list up a little bit so it will show that a little better. So there we go. Let's add a buddy. Then we get our new buddy added to the underlying data, which through data binding updates the list.
And notice that normally you would just be putting this thing together, but James was talking about these things as models and views and controllers. Normally you just go, oh, we're creating an application, throw these things and make it work.
Exactly.
And the reason is because suppose this thing is starting to get big and complicated and you're getting lots of stuff and everything is getting too messy.
Yep.
And so now at that point you say, how do we manage this? Which typically you break things into smaller, more discrete pieces.
That's right. And so let's start doing that to this application. So first thing we're going to break out is the model. So what I'm going to do is create a new ActionScript class. So the way that this is most frequently done in Flex to create a model is to create a singleton class. So I'm going to create a model class here. And so now let's add the singleton behavior to this class. So to do that, we don't need a constructor in this case. What we do need is a private static var called _instance, and that's of type model.
And notice it's static, which means there's only one in the entire application.
That's right.
And it's worth pointing out, you don't have to use singleton. It's just that you need some universal place to go to stick things.
That's right.
And so very often using a singleton is the way people do that.
Yep. So now let's do another public static function, and this one's going to be called getInstance. So getInstance, what it's going to do is just return model, and what we're going to do here is say if our instance is not initialized, instance equals new model. So there we initialize it if it's not initialized, and then we just return _instance. And so this is a very basic singleton in ActionScript. One thing that, if you're familiar with singletons, you may notice that in most singletons in Java and other languages, we put a private constructor on the model, and so that no one can actually instantiate this object outside of the singleton.
Yeah, notice the constructor is called inside of this getInstance.
Right.
And that has access to it, but nobody else does.
Right.
And also, when you get the instance, you're getting an instance of this class.
Right.
And the static variable is the instance also of this class. So this whole thing is just a way to hold the model object and make sure that there's only ever one of them.
Yeah, and so in ActionScript we actually don't have private constructors, and so we can't protect. There are some tricky ways to do it, but it's rather hard to actually protect against someone actually instantiating this class somewhere else as well.
Which is actually true in other languages. I mean, it's possible in Java to get around the private mechanism.
Right.
So,
So let's create now our model. And what this is actually going to be is we're actually just going to take this model that we created over here in our application and now just move that over into our model. And so that's all we need to do there. We do need to import this array collection class. So there we go. And now we can just remove all that stuff from there. Okay, so now in order to use this model, what we're going to do is in our main application, rather than just accessing buddies, because buddies no longer exist in this application, we're going to access our singleton model. So we do model.getInstance, that gets us to our singleton, and then we have access to buddies. And then likewise, what we will do in our data binding down here is bind directly to the model getInstance buddies. So now let's save this one and go back here and make sure it all still works. So look, looks good, all works. So now we've separated out our model. We could put other model properties in here as well. You definitely don't want to always use the model for every single thing. If a component is the only one that's ever going to use a piece of data, then you don't have to have it into a global single.
Yeah, you just
like
stick it in the component itself. Yeah, the reason for separating the model is so multiple other components can see it.
Exactly.
And so you're basically breaking up your system into pieces.
That's right. So now let's move forward and break out our controller into a separate class as well. So what we're going to do is create another ActionScript class, and this one we'll call controller. And so in this one, what we're going to do is just move that functionality, that add buddy functionality, out of our application into the controller. So we can just copy and paste that function in there, and that's really it for our controller. Should be good to go. So now, in order to use this controller in our application, what we're going to do is actually create an instance of the controller here in our application. So we just say controller and give it an ID.
And notice there's typically only one model and one controller, and we're controlling the number of models by making it a singleton. We're controlling the number of controllers by creating just one inside of our main application code.
Right. And so now what we can do is, rather than calling addBuddy, which no longer exists in this application, we're just going to call c.addBuddy. So now we're calling the controller's addBuddy method, and now let's go verify that this all still works. There we go, and addBuddy, there we go. So now we've separated out all the pieces here for MVC. We have our view, which is essentially just our main application. It is going to communicate with our controller, which is going to update our model, and then because our model is a global object and through the singleton and has a bindable variable on it, the data binding here in the list will be notified. The list will be notified when that buddy's property changes.
So one of the arguments against using MVC is that there's still a fair amount of coupling. The pieces are kind of tied together, and a solution to that is to decouple things even further by saying, all right, the only way these components are going to communicate with each other is through messages.
Right.
So we have this singleton message bus, and anybody who is interested is going to register themselves on the bus and send messages and listen to messages. And that way you have a system which is even more scalable, because the only limitation is the number of messages that you have on the bus, and that's typically not a problem.
Right.
So when you think about saying, well, we need to add more stuff to this, you go, okay, we just connect to the bus, and that's it.
That's right. Yeah, and so the message bus is a great way to allow components to communicate through this central bus, but not have to know anything about each other. And so that's what we're going to build here now is the message bus approach. So let's go in and create a new Flex project. We'll call this one MB.
And so first we need to say what is it that we're sending on this bus.
Yep, yeah, and so we need to define some plumbing here in this application before we can really build out the UI. So the first thing we're going to create is a new ActionScript class, and this one is going to be called message, and its superclass is going to be flash.events.event. So we're just going to extend the base event class there. So there we go, we get our message class created.
And we do that because the event has all of the wiring that we're interested in.
Exactly,
already.
Yep. And so now inside of our message we want to add a few things here. So this particular message is going to be a change message, and so, or we'll be able to create a change message. And so to do that, what we're going to do is create a public static const, which I don't think we've talked about const yet, but you want to explain const, Bruce?
Const is just something that can't be changed. You use it when you are creating something like this, where here we just want to be able to look at this thing and go, oh, it's a change message.
That's
and
right.
So we stick this string in there, and there would be no reason for ever changing it, so it doesn't need to be variable. It's
Right.
the opposite of a variable in a sense. It
Right.
doesn't change.
Yep. Great. So now let's create a public var data, and it's just going to be of type object. So that's going to be where we store kind of the body of the message, or what we really want to send.
It basically allows you to stick any data of interest in.
Yeah, exactly. So that's our message that we're going to be sending. So now let's go create another piece of plumbing here, the actual message bus. So we'll create the message bus, and its superclass is going to be flash.events.eventDispatcher. So the event dispatcher class, like the event class, is just a built-in class in Flash to allow you to build these types of message buses. And this is really how all of the UI components in Flex and Flash communicate, is through an event dispatcher.
Actually, this isn't the way we did it.
Oh, you're right.
We're using composition in the book.
We are using composition.
So it's not extending it. It's actually composing.
You are right. So let's fix that. So, so Bruce is right. We actually decided to build the underlying event dispatcher into the inside of this class rather than through composition rather than extension.
It just, the code worked better that way.
It did work better.
That's often how you discover that composition is preferable to inheritance.
That's right.
And there's a design pattern maxim that says prefer composition to inheritance. And when you internalize that, you usually find that your code comes out better. The problem with object-oriented programming is there's a lot of emphasis because inheritance is kind of tricky and complicated.
That's right.
So you spend a lot of time learning it, and as a result, many people begin to overuse inheritance.
Yep, definitely. So now let's do our composition here. We're going to add the dispatcher here to this, and this will be of type event dispatcher. We could use either the interface or the class. Either way, event dispatcher. Now we're going to initialize that as an event dispatcher. And so now we need some functions here on this message bus that will really allow you to send messages through the bus. So the first one is a public static function called add message listener. So this will allow any component to subscribe to messages on this message bus. So
this is the publish subscribe model in it.
Exactly.
So some component says I'm interested in a particular message, and it goes to the message bus and it says, here, I'm going to add a listener so that anytime that message comes up, I'll get notified.
Yep, exactly right.
And that function that you're passing is the callback function that is called whenever the message shows up.
Yep, so two parameters, the type and then the function that we're going to call. So then all what we're going to do is call our dispatcher and say add an event listener, and the first parameter is the type. The next parameter is the listener function, which is passed in.
And when you say type, you mean type of message that we're interested in.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And then we're going to specify a few other parameters here. The one that we're really interested in here is this use weak reference. And the reason why we need to put that in there, user weak reference, is that if we don't, then you'll have to explicitly remove the event listeners in order for the objects to be that they're tied to be garbage collected. Whereas when we set that to true, the weak reference to true, then we don't have to worry about that. Okay, so now let's add the next one here, public static function for remove message listener. We still are putting this one in here because even though we've used the weak reference, we a lot of times will want to still explicitly remove event listeners if we're no longer interested in hearing those.
Basically, it says that you want to stop listening for that message.
Right. And so now what we're going to do is call our dispatcher.remove event listener, and then we just specify the type and the function, and that will do the remove for us. Then the last thing here, public static function send a message, and so this will send a message. So it's going to be of type message, and we could have used an interface for that, probably should have, but we'll just put it in as a message. And then all that we do now is call the dispatcher and say dispatch this message, and so we just pass that in there. And so that's our message bus.
And a lot of the power of the message bus is the event dispatcher that's already sorted things out for us. So
exactly.
All we're really doing is wrapping that in our own message bus.
That's right. So now let's go and create some views that will be communicating together in our application. So to do that, let's create some MXML components. The first one here will be called view 1, and it's going to be based on Canvas. And I'm going to remove the width and height here so that we can set those elsewhere. So now, inside of this view, what we're going to have is a list. And we'll give it an ID, we'll call it list. And then what we need to do is tell our list how to get some data. And so to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to set up an initialize event listener on this component. And what it's going to do is when it initializes, what we're going to call is the message bus. And then we're going to add a message listener here. And the message listeners that we're interested, the message type that we're interested in is going to be message.change. So we're interested in change messages. And then what we want to do is call a function, specify the function. We could externalize this or specify it this way. And that takes a single parameter, the message. And then when we get a message, what we want to do is set list.dataProvider equals m.data. So m is the message, data is the property that's going to hold the data that got
Data
passed.
is that object that we stuck inside of the message to hold anything.
Yep, and we'll see in the next view that we're going to build where we actually set that and create a message. Okay, so that's our first view. Now let's go in and create another view. So this one will be view 2, and this one will be based on VBox instead of Canvas.
And note that the reason that we're creating view 1 and view 2 is to represent these many components that we want to wire together through the message bus.
That's right. And so what we're going to do here is have a text input. So the text input, we'll give an ID. We'll call it input. And then we're going to have a button. And the button will have a label on it called add to my data, which we'll create in just a second. And then we're going to set some other properties on here. So we only want this button to be enabled, and we're going to use data binding if the input.text.length is not equal to 0.
So that means there has to be something in the input text field for the button to be enabled.
That's right. Then we're going to set a click event handler. So what we want to do is manipulate some underlying data here. So what we're going to do is create an array collection here. We'll give it an ID. We'll call it my data. So rather than putting this into a model, we're just going to put it right in this component. But then we're going to add a collection change event to this array collection. So what we're going to say is that whenever this collection changes, let's push a message into the message bus to tell anyone that's interested that the data changed.
And we don't put it into a separate model because this is the only thing that needs to use it. So there's no reason to externalize it.
So let's create the new message, and it's of type message.change. That's our message type. And then we're going to set the e.data property equal to my data, this array collection.
And I should point out that we only use message.change in this example, but we could add other types of messages within the message object, and then it would produce different results.
That's right. So now let's call our message bus.sendMessage and pass it our message. So then last thing we need to do is when the user clicks the button, we're going to call my data, that's our array collection, .add item. And the item that we're going to add is the input.text. So those are our two views. And these are totally decoupled, know nothing about each other. And so let's go back to our main application, and then we're just going to add these views to the application. So we just say view 1 and view 2.
And both of these know how to discover the message bus and communicate with it.
That's right.
So they're basically decoupled.
They know nothing about each other. All they know about is the message bus and the fact that a message is going to be passed.
Right.
So then let's run this one and see how this one works. So there we go. We get our list, which in this case isn't displaying a whole lot. And we get text input, which we need to enter some data into. Then we say add to my data. We see, there we go, the list got that data passed through the message. So the way that it worked, add to my data, created the message, put it on the message bus while the list was listening for that message and knew when it got that message to update its view of the data that was passed to the message.
So the two components are decoupled from each other, and if we wanted to add a third component, we can just throw it in there, and we don't have to rewrite anything in the existing components, and that's the key.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and we could even create more instances of these views. I mean, the idea of separating these out is so that we can reuse them, and so we can certainly have, you know, the list in there multiple times. We can have something on the something listening on the message bus that could go and save this information to a server, all sorts of things.
And so you can kind of see how this is in many ways an improvement over the basic model view controller because the things are far more decoupled.
Yep, exactly. And this also works really well with modular Flex applications. So when you get into large Flex applications and want those to be partitioned, you'll use Flex modules. And modules work really well with an event bus because it's much easier when you really don't know in a modular system what is going to be needing to hear about messages or be notified when things happen.
So we've written a couple of frameworks from scratch here, but there's like a bunch of other frameworks that other people have
There
created,
are,
right?
yeah. It's kind of like the
frameworkitis is something
it's
that
serious frameworkitis. Yeah, there's a lot of Flex frameworks out there. For the MVC approaches, there's Cairngorm, there's Pure MVC, and a number of others. For the message bus approach, this is beginning to be integrated into some of the frameworks that are fuller, have a broader set of things. So Parsley is one of those that has a message bus, and then the new inversion of control dependency injection frameworks like Swizz and Parsley, and the Smarty Pants IOC and a number of other frameworks are out there. There's lots of code examples and documentation for these frameworks out there that you can go read about them, and my recommendation is to try them and see which one you like best. Which one fits with your personality and your developer team skills and those sorts of things best. So lots of great options.